Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Afghanistan, security forces and the Taliban fighters have clashed just hours after the beginning of the week-long violence reduction agreement. Government officials say Taliban fighters attacked Afghan troops in Balkh province. The Taliban say Afghan forces tried to enter territory controlled by the group. They also confirmed similar clashes in other parts of the country. Earlier, the two sides announced the start of the 7-day violence reduction agreement. This will be followed by a peace deal between the Taliban and the US on 29th February. Taliban spokesperson Suhail Shaheen said the deal will end foreign occupation in Afghanistan. The development comes after more than a year of talks between American and the Afghan Taliban representatives. Meanwhile, Pakistan has welcomed the announcement of the signing of a peace deal between the Taliban and the US. In a statement, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said Islamabad played a constructive role in the US-Taliban dialogue. The Foreign Minister said it was not easy to convince the Taliban for negotiations with the US. Qureshi said the whole world, including the US, has acknowledged Pakistan's positive role. The Foreign Minister said Washington should be aware of the spoilers in this peace initiative. The United Nations says over 100,000 Afghan civilians were killed or wounded in the last 10 years. The report by the UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan comes as a week of violence reduction begins today. The report said 3,493 civilians were killed last year, while nearly 7,000 others suffered injuries. It said there is a 21% increase in the civilian casualties by the Taliban and an 18% rise in casualties by the US and Afghan forces. The UN said violence in the country affected almost every civilian in some way. The international body said it is absolutely imperative for all the parties to seize the moment to stop fighting, as peace is long overdue. Taking steps against terrorism, Pakistan has successfully eliminated militants, foiled terror attacks and brought back stability. In the last 20 years, the country's military and the security forces have tirelessly fought against the menace of terrorism. Under anti-terrorism campaign Raddul Fasad, the military has carried out almost 149,000 operations and averted nearly 400 terrorist plans since 2017. Due to forces' efforts, Pakistan's economic hub, Karachi's ranking has improved by 91 points in the Crimes Index. To stop cross-border terrorism, Pakistan has fenced 1,450 kilometers of its border with Afghanistan. Pakistan Army has built 343 forts and 161 are under construction along the border. Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa said the army is a state institution working for security and stability as a force of peace and order. In another act of state terrorism, Indian troops have martyred 2 youths in Anantnag district of occupied Kashmir. Police said the civilians were targeted during a cordon and search operation in the Sangam village of the district. Indian forces have martyred 28 Kashmiris over the past 2 months. Meanwhile, Indian forces have arrested 2 Kashmiris under controversial Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. A person booked under the act can be jailed for months without bail. Civilians were arrested for alleged misuse of social media against Indian forces in the valley. The valley is reeling under Indian curfew and the communications blackout for the last 202 days. Pakistan's President Arif Alvi has expressed a deep concern over human rights violations by Indian forces in occupied Kashmir. He said this while meeting with Indian actor turned politician Shatrughan Sinha in Lahore. The president highlighted the persecution of Indian minorities and condemned the country's new citizenship law as discriminatory against Muslims. He also apprised the Indian politician of Prime Minister Imran Khan's efforts for peace in the region. During the meeting, the Indian politician says there is a need to work for the promotion of peace in the subcontinent. President Donald Trump will raise the issue of religious freedom in India during his visit to the country next week. US officials said religious rights violations in India's new Citizenship Act is on Trump's agenda for his meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The official said religious freedom issue is extremely important to the Trump administration. Meanwhile, United States Commission on International Religious Freedom has criticized the Citizenship Amendment Act. In a report, SCIRF highlights BJP's anti-Muslim sentiment influencing the laws of the land. It said a number of political parties, NGOs and religious groups have moved Indian Supreme Court against the law. Meanwhile, in India, countrywide protests, rallies and sit-ins against the controversial Citizenship Act continue despite the government's pressure. The BJP government is facing massive demonstrations against the law for the last 3 months. In a meeting with Supreme Court appointed interlocutors, Shaheen Bagh protesters said police have blocked the road to the sit-in site. The protesters said the plain-clothed policemen are stopping traffic and blaming it on demonstrators spreading negative propaganda. Meanwhile, similar all-women sit-ins continue in Mumbai, Kolkata and Lucknow. The new coronavirus has claimed another 109 lives in the last 24 hours in China. It now puts the death toll to 2,345. In a significant decline of new cases, the National Health Commission says 397 more infections have been confirmed, bringing the total to 76,000. More in this report.
Toll from the new coronavirus outbreak rising globally, fear is spreading at a faster rate. Italy has reported its first COVID-19 fatality, while in the Middle East, 5 people have died in Iran. Iraqi officials have clamped down on travel to and from the country and have begun screening travelers for the virus. The Najaf International Airport, in cooperation with the Najaf Health Department, has taken all necessary measures by providing detection equipment in arrival halls to check the passengers, and thank God, no cases have been found. The World Health Organization says the international community must act quickly to control the spread of the new coronavirus. The global health body is warning the opportunity to stem the spread of the disease is shrinking.
Our situation is that we're still in a phase where containment is possible with a narrowing window of opportunity. And if there is anything move into another level, then we will announce it as soon as possible. We'll be the first to tell you that we're shifting into another level.
A WHO team of international experts and Chinese officials are visiting Wuhan today to assess the situation.
In Saudi Arabia, finance leaders from the world's 20 largest economies have gathered in Riyadh. They discussed economic policies and the impact of the coronavirus on global growth. Speaking at a conference, the kingdom's central bank governors said the country's economic growth is likely to jack up this year. He said this positive development will lead to further strengthening of growth in the non-oil sector. Governor Ahmed Al-Khalfai said that it was too early to get the full picture of the economic damage following the coronavirus.
Geopolitical risks remain with us, and the risk of a pandemic following the outbreak of the coronavirus in China looms on the horizon. It is still too early to get a full picture of the economic damage from this event to the global growth this year.
Israeli police shot dead a Palestinian youth in Jerusalem's annexed Old City. Witnesses say the youth was shot several times before medics arrived at the scene. Meanwhile, thousands of Palestinians took to the streets in Gaza to protest against the U.S. Middle East peace plan. Tensions in the region have been high after U.S. President Donald Trump unveiled his plan, which gives Israel a green light to annex key parts of the occupied West Bank. Moving on to Iran, where the counting for the parliamentary elections is underway after voting ended last evening. Over 7,000 candidates are contesting 290 seats across 31 provinces. The Interior Ministry said it will start releasing the results for smaller constituencies, while voter turnout will also be announced today. It said final results will be approved by the 12-member Guardian Council in early next week. The ministry added the approved results will be released about 2 weeks later. The parliament represents the country's 207 electoral districts. Some prominent pro-reform politicians and activists have called for the elections to be boycotted. A clerical body is responsible for appointing the supreme leader. Iran has criticized the Financial Action Task Force for placing the country on a blacklist. Foreign Office spokesman Abbas Musavi called the step a politicized act, saying the stigma of financing terrorism has nothing to do with Tehran. The task force claimed the step was taken after Iran failed to comply with the international anti-terrorism financing norms. Musavi said for over 2 years, Iran has followed regulations with regard to money laundering and terrorist financing. It's time for a short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. In South Sudan, rebel leader Riek Machar has been sworn in as the country's first vice president. This comes after President Salva Kiir and Machar agreed to form a unity government as part of a 2018 peace deal on Thursday. The two rivals will be attempting to govern for the third time since the country's independence in 2011. South Sudan's conflict broke out in 2013 after a dispute between Kiir and Machar over the number of states in the country. The fighting has left some 380,000 people dead and forced 4 million to flee their homes. In Kazakhstan, police have arrested around 200 anti-government protesters in the country's largest metropolis, Almaty. They were taking part in rallies called by banned opposition groups. Police also arrested prominent Democratic Party activist Zanbulat Mamey. Demonstrations have intensified since the resignation of President Nursultan Nazarbayev last March after almost 3 decades in power. President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev has promised to adopt a more liberal approach towards dissent and ease restrictions on protests, but demonstrators term the reforms as cosmetic. Hundreds of people have gathered in London against the extradition of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. They demanded his immediate release. Scores of demonstrators gathered outside the Australia House in London with slogans of "Journalism is not a crime" and "Free Julian Assange." They gathered in the Strand in the central part of the city. The protesters then marched on Parliament Square. Assange is being held in Belmarsh prison in southeastern London as his full extradition hearing will start on 24th of February. In Canada, Ontario's 4 major teaching unions have closed the province's public education system, leaving over 2 million school children out of classrooms. Representing nearly 200,000 teachers and education workers, unions are calling on the government to back down on cuts to education. Unions ask for a 2% wage increase, but the government capped public sector wage rises at 1% for 3 years. Elementary teachers said the future of the full-day kindergarten, funding for special education teachers and seniority hiring rules are their main concerns. The provincial education minister said Ontario teachers are the second highest paid in Canada. Teachers said they will not back down from their demands, having been without a contract since August the 31st. The 2-day European Union summit to set the budget for the next 7 years has ended without agreement. The EU is attempting to close an $81 billion gap left by the UK's departure. The bloc faces challenges on climate, migration and development. More in this report.
European leaders fell out over their next budget following tense talks to find a way of filling the Brexit-shaped hole. The summit exposed rifts between the rich and poorer states.
I'd even rather not talk about the details. The differences were just too big. We didn't make it, so we will have to continue to work. Anyway, there was no Franco-German proposal. After the many bilateral meetings overnight, there was a joint proposal of the EU President and the European Commission. This proposal was not even introduced in detail because it was clear that the main elements of the proposal wouldn't be sufficient to reach a compromise.
Denmark, Austria, Sweden and the Netherlands said spending should cap at 1% of joint GDP, but the beneficiaries of that spending asked for more than the previous proposal of 1.074%. Meanwhile, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said EU discord is a sign of democracy.
All of us working on the common priority that is the European Union and its budget for the next 7 years. And I think it is a good tradition in democracy to debate over the different views, the different emphasis or the different focuses that are put forward by the different member states.
The trillion-euro budget and its multi-annual financial framework will come into effect from next year and run to the end of 2027.
Soldiers from Niger and France have killed 120 terrorists in a joint military operation in the southwest Niger. In a statement, the country's defense ministry said forces also seized bomb-making equipment and vehicles. The statement said the operation was carried out in the vast Tillaberi region near the border with Mali and Burkina Faso. It said there were no losses among Nigerian or French troops. Niger's defense minister, Issoufou Katambe, praised the French cooperation in the battle against terrorism. The region has been in a state of emergency for the past 2 years after militant attacks that killed hundreds of Nigerian soldiers. The UN Refugee Agency says more than 4,000 people are forced by violence to flee their homes every day in Burkina Faso. A report from the agency says the major reason for the violence is an increase in attacks by the extremist groups. The international body said 765,000 people have already been displaced since January the 1st. It said people fleeing the violence report attacks, killings, rape and theft by the militant groups. The agency also said an estimated 150,000 people have fled in the last 3 weeks alone. In Indonesia, 8 students have been killed as a flash flood swept away the banks of Sembor River. In a statement, National Disaster Agency spokesman August Wibowo said 23 others were injured while 3 are missing. Wibowo said a group of 250 students were tracking and exploring the river in Sleman district as a Boy Scouting activity. He said water volume from the upstream suddenly rose with a strong current sweeping away the students who were on the side of the river. The Southeast Asian archipelago is regularly hit by the floods during the rainy season, which starts in late November. Torrential rain in January triggered flooding and landslides that killed nearly 70 people in and around the capital, Jakarta. Prince Harry and his wife Meghan have decided not to use the term Sussex Royal in their brand from this spring. In January, the Duke and the Duchess abruptly decided to begin a new life in Canada, stepping back from their royal duties in Britain. Harry and Meghan had planned to use the name Sussex Royal for their new charitable foundation and social media accounts. For this, the couple had been in discussion with Buckingham Palace. It has now been agreed government rules prevent the word royal being used. The couple will remove the royal name tag from their Instagram and website as well. Applications to trademark the Sussex Royal brand will also be withdrawn. The two will carry out their final public engagements as members of Britain's royal family until their status changes on March 31st. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. In Russia, a spate of fake bomb threats are disrupting daily life in the capital, Moscow. Pranksters have caused courts, schools and shopping malls to be evacuated, causing financial losses worth millions. But authorities remain clueless about the people behind the prank calls. More in this report.
Hoaxes about planted bombs have occurred in several Russian cities, but the capital Moscow is the most affected. According to reports, the city of 16 million people has to deal with hundreds of phony threats a day. In the last couple of months alone, nearly 2 million people have been evacuated from buildings in the capital.
I've been waiting for more than an hour already because they have evacuated everyone. I had some plans to return back to my office, but it seems I will have to change my plans due to evacuation.
The threats are always issued in the same way. A slew of emails are sent from encrypted providers to several organizations and companies.
Evacuations took place for about a month and a half at the end of last year in December and late November. It is very difficult to count, but on average it took place several times a week and sometimes several times a day.
One local resident says her daughter's school was evacuated several times a day throughout December. This completely disrupts academic life as students' lessons are cancelled or postponed repeatedly.
There was a lot of hustle and bustle in the changing rooms because they are small and there are lots of classes. You had to hurry to get dressed and go out on the street without getting lost.
Earlier this month, 1,500 locations were affected in a single day, including the Central Church, 30 courts, 150 educational institutions, and over 230 metro stations were affected, as well as swimming pools, shopping centers, and clinics. The upheaval this created has cost Russia millions of dollars, but the culprits remain at large, with experts suggesting authorities are at an impasse.
If we talked about it on state channels, the lack of confidence would be even greater towards the government. Everyone would start saying that the government can do nothing, and that is helpless. And this story showed that the state was completely helpless.
Officials admit blocking these encrypted emails achieves little. Russian security expert Valery Shiryaev says there is no real answer to this new weapon, which sows panic among communities and robs the state of revenue. The crisis, along with similar phenomena the world over, goes to show technology has advanced faster than governments can handle.
At the New York Toy Fair, toy maker Mattel has announced a new line of Barbie dolls and Summer Olympic kit. The dolls in sports gear for karate and surfing spotlight the new Summer Games added to this year's Olympics at Tokyo. Watch this report.
Children who want to appear in the Olympic Games are slightly closer to achieving the goal, at least in their imaginations. Barbies are back, sporting sports gear they will need to get to the top of the podium. Mattel has showcased a new line of Barbie dolls in sports kit used in the Summer Olympics.
All of them come in their sports outfits, but they also come in their warm-up suits, which are reflective of what's going to be seen at the Tokyo 2020 Olympics. They also can inspire kids from any country to see themselves and the different women who are competing in these sports.
The collection comes in time for the return of softball to the Games, last included in 2008 at Beijing. The remaining sports celebrated in the collection include karate, surfing and skateboarding, each making their debut at Tokyo.
Well, the Olympics are so big, and you also have to think globally. You know, Mattel and Hot Wheels is a global brand, so you often think U.S. No, you can't think U.S. The whole world watches the Olympics. So when you have something that's going to appeal to the entire world, and young kids are going to be watching, to have products that are tied to it really makes sense.
Mattel's other Olympics edition toy lines, such as Hot Wheels and Uno, will hit the shelves in March.
Time to take a look at the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Thanks for watching.